Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Toby Talks. Today I've got a really exciting guest on with me. He fronts the Sky Sports Rugby Union coverage. He's also the main man that holds the fort together alongside James Haskell and Mike Tindall on Rugby Joe's House of Rugby, Alex Payne. Thank you, Alex, for taking the time to talk to me this evening. I guess the first and most obvious question is, how have you found the last couple of months? A lot of people that I've spoken to, it's kind of been a bit of a mixed response, some making the most of this time and others desperate for the current lockdown situation to end.
Yeah, very nice to join you. Thanks for having us on to it. It's how am I don't really know what the answer is to that. I think I'm a fairly positive person, so bits of me have actually really enjoyed it. I don't mean that in a sort of flippant way, but I love a challenge, and we're certainly right in the teeth of one of those at the moment. I've got a tech business that I work pretty hard on. I was going to say Monday to Friday, but it's Monday to Sunday, and it's pretty much every waking hour. And that is all consuming, but sort of heading in the right direction. So that actually has been very exciting. I love the challenge, and I'm learning so much about business and fundraising and tech platforms, and that's been really exciting. The podcast trundles on, House of Rugby, which I do with the two reprobates, James Haskell and Mike Tindall. That's been quite good fun, actually, and really almost quite cathartic and therapeutic, a lovely distraction. And then I've had what I can only describe as the torture of home education, and that I'm not a fan of. There is no part of me that is ever going to go into education and teaching. And frankly, I've hated every single second of it. But it is what it is. So highs, lows, peaks and troughs, I think like everybody else, but sort of fairly excited that hopefully the lights are close to going green again, and we might get some normality back.
And you mentioned the tech business that you're building. Has that been something that's always been on the back burner, particularly throughout your broadcasting career? Has it always been something that you've been heavily involved in and something that spiked your interest?
So it's a good question. So the tech business, for those who are interested, is called The Room, and it's a meeting room, essentially an online meeting room, fairly discreet, that enables mutually beneficial collaborations between brands, people of influence, talent and celebrities, and charities. And there's no money changing hands. It's all about sort of, as I say, these contra deals that are done, and everybody benefits. So it's been really good fun, actually. We've got a lot going on at the moment. We've grown in the last 12 months from 2 of us around a kitchen table to 24 in the business, and we've got a CTO from eBay and all that kind of thing. So we're definitely making some quite good progress. I've always had an interest in business, and it's sort of I've tried probably about 5 or 6 different things over the last 10, 15 years. Most of them have sunk without trace. 1 or 2 of them I've sold for pocket money. But this is sort of the one I've landed on, and I've put some proper time and resource and effort into. And it came about, I mean, as you all know, the sports broadcasting world is pretty weekend dominated. And when I started presenting age 24 or whatever it was, I was playing a lot of golf. I wasn't getting any better. Most of my friends were sweating it in the city, or proper jobs. There was no one really to play with, and therefore I thought, right, you've got to actually do something with your life that could potentially be a bit more worthwhile than just chipping out of the bunker on the 17th. So I had a digital publishing business for a while. I've had a surf magazine. I've done a sort of bit of public speaking coaching, that kind of thing, mainly to try and keep out of trouble, mainly to, I suppose, diversify as well. I mean, the media landscape is and actually is becoming increasingly turbulent. The days of broadcasting careers as they were when I started, and I can't believe I'm saying that, it sort of makes me sound very old, but long-term contracts in broadcasting and long-term gigs are rarer and rarer. Everything on media and online now is instant, it's combustible, it's gone. There aren't many long-term presenting jobs out there anymore, and I wouldn't say I sort of foresaw it, but I was definitely conscious of it about 10 years ago. And I didn't want my livelihood, and actually funny, if it was when I had kids, funny enough, I didn't want my entire career, my earning power, to be in the hands of one person at the top of a broadcasting company. That person changes, a new person comes in and wants to take it in a different direction, and you're gone. And so yeah, it was an interest, it was a security. And yeah, it's interesting. I've definitely gone from being a broadcaster with a small tech business to now feeling that I work in a tech business and I do the odd bit of broadcasting. And actually, it's really good fun. I love the challenges, I love the changes, and who knows where we're going to end up next.
Well, I'd imagine it's very exciting that, I guess, the broadcasting side of things, and like you say, the flexible weekend work has allowed you to develop that over a period of time. But where did the love for sports broadcasting, where was it born from initially? Was it something you studied at university? I know you went to Edinburgh University. Was it something that you did there, or was it something that just came to you quickly afterwards? Because like you say, moving into sports journalism and your first broadcasting job at the age of 24 was a pretty young age to be doing that.
Yeah, and it was worse than that. I actually looked about 14 at the time, so it was a fairly inauspicious start to the broadcasting career. I actually did history of art at Edinburgh, which doesn't in any way, shape, or form get you into the sports industry. But actually, originally I wanted to be a sculptor many, many years ago. It sounds a bit arty-farty and airy-fairy, but actually I'm really into woodwork and that kind of thing. And I used to create these mad sort of totem pole sculptures, which was a very long time ago in a different world. I ended up in sport predominantly because, like so many people who listen to this and yourself, I was a massive sports nut growing up. I played a lot of rugby. I went to a school that was sort of, relatively into it. I was very passionate at playing, but I was also an obsessive when it came to watching. And I was the kid that recorded Rugby Special every Sunday, and I'd watch it back on a Monday and probably a Tuesday. I recorded every single live game that there was. I've still somewhere in a box got every single one of England's games from the 1991 Rugby World Cup on VHS. I'm quite brave to admit that in a public forum, but I was that kid. And I spent my pocket money on rugby videos. I had a season ticket at Bath, and it was funny. I remember now, and I often joke about it with my parents. I used to watch a lot of sport. And my parents were forever saying, "We get off your backside, get off the beanbag, and go and do something useful. You're never going to earn a living from watching sport." And I sort of look back now and think I've earned a pretty good living from watching sport. So it's quite nice occasionally to be able to poke them in the eye with that. But yeah, I ended up doing a lot of work experience around the sports industry. I did an internship with IMG, which is the big sports agency founded by Mark McCormack. I went and did a bit of work with Bath for a while. I worked in a data agency, data, not dating. I went and worked with some sports agencies, etc. And it wasn't really, and it was all great fun and I loved it and it was very exciting, but it wasn't really until I did 2 weeks work experience at Sky that I properly got the hook. And I was probably a 20-year-old kid on the touchline at England v France at Twickenham. And I was just like, this is where it's at. I want to work in broadcasting. I want to, work on telling of the story. I wasn't that interested necessarily in presenting or reporting, but it was just the buzz of being there on game day. So yeah, I did a bit of work experience, and because I was keen and enthusiastic, and I knew relatively robust in my knowledge, I just sort of I just hung around like a bad smell really, and just constantly came down from university. Got myself out to Australia on the Lions tour in 2001, and just kept in touch and just wheedled and eased my way into it until I actually joined Sky permanently a week after I left university. And it was only to make the sandwiches and collect the photocopying and clean the alloys on Stuart Barnes' car, but it was a job and I loved it. It was very exciting.
So was it literally a case of that? Was it doing those odd jobs, like you say, and just being relentless with it that eventually got you the gig? I mean, was there a moment that perhaps you did a piece to camera or a report where somebody picked up on that and said, look, we'd like to give you a shot now presenting the program as a full, because you were very young when you were actually fronting the Sky Rugby Union coverage.
Yeah, it's funny, and a lot of people say, how do you get into broadcasting? And I always try and be helpful and say that it's you need a passion for the subject that you want to cover. I would never have been a very good history broadcaster or music broadcaster because I don't have that burning passion in the same way. I ended up getting a gig sort of with a microphone because I'd done a lot of photocopying. I'd done a lot of sandwich collection. I made it's a collection. I made a filthy cup of tea. And I then began to do a little bit of editing and that kind of thing. It was all on that journey. But the advice I always give is that was almost the most important part of my broadcasting education, because it's another language. You have to know who the right people are, what it is they're referring to. You need to understand television and as well as the subject matter that you're talking about. So I kind of just I just immersed myself at the bottom level of it. And I actually used to do a bit of work on the poker. So I was a sort of huge poker fan, played a bit of poker, watched a lot of poker. And I ended up doing these exit interviews for this poker tournament. And a producer spotted it and he said, "Oh, that's all right. You listened to the answer," I think was his was his sort of observation. He said, "Oh, that's interesting." He said, "You're interested." And inside by that point, I was burning to become a reporter and become a presenter. But I'd kept those cards very, very close to my chest. I'd actually seen a lot of people who I'd come through the ranks as a production runner with. And they'd all said, "Oh, I want to be a presenter." And I remember I used to do the running on the Champions League when Sky had it. And there were some extraordinary days, I can tell you. But lots of the runners who were collecting the sandwiches were also saying, "Oh, I want to be a presenter," etc. And they never managed to bed themselves into a team, because everybody knew that their ambition was to present, and therefore there wasn't really any value in having them in a team, because you need the people in a team who are going to do the editing, the cutting, the features, etc. So I purely by chance, I just kept those cards very close to my chest. I hadn't really spoken too much to anyone about what it was I wanted to do. But when the opportunity presented itself, I said, actually, I am interested in giving it a crack, seeing what happens. And the executive producer, his name was Martin Turner, and just the most amazing guy, real visionary in television. He took it away. He didn't do anything at all. Nothing came of it. Other people had their shots, and I was sort of waiting to see what would happen. And then one night he rang me on a Friday, and he said, "We haven't got a reporter for the Army-Navy game at Twickenham tomorrow." He said, "You're doing it." And I was like, right. And at that stage, I'd done not a minute of training. I'd never acted. I'd never spoken in public. I'd done any debating. I had done absolutely no broadcasting, public speaking at all. I didn't sleep very well that night. I got up, I was at Twickenham, before the dawn had broken, and it was literally post-match interviews. So they're 3 questions. It's a minute and a half all in, and I probably did 4 or 5 of them. And I can only describe the experience of going live on television with a microphone as almost like sort of putting your toes over the edge of a cliff. And just it's that knowledge that if I get this wrong, or I swear, or I just completely and utterly balls this up, that's it. That's everything I've wanted gone. And it is quite a weird sensation to feel that. Anyway, I didn't do it very well, but I didn't manage to swear, which in itself was an achievement. And he took it. I think he was quite harsh, actually, this criticism. I was exhilarated that I'd done it. I got out, I'd managed to get out alive. But he was quite a hard taskmaster, and he just said, "Cool, okay, well, we'll keep going with this and see what happens." And I went from making the tea to reporting on the Lions tour in New Zealand in about 6 months, which is pretty quick. And I definitely wouldn't do it that quickly again. But you got to learn pretty fast, and off you go. That was it.
But then I guess the 2 reasons why you made that happen was, first of all, like you say, having that burning desire and passion for it, and wanting to be the one that conveys that story, and then obviously as well not saying no to anything, and being willing to chip in with any odd task that kind of comes your way. But was there a pinch me moment for you? Was it the Lions tour probably when you first started out? Was that your kind of pinch me moment when you're like, I'm here now, I'm involved in this, I've got World Cup winners and former Lions coaches around me, and I'm talking to them, interviewing them, and presenting in front of these people?
Yes. So there are 2 pinch me moments that I remember. The first, I remember the moment that I was just absolutely blown away. So in 2001, which was before I was still at university, I spent my student loan going around Australia with a couple of mates in an old banger, following the Lions tour. And at the weekends, I worked for Sky, so I was their gopher and their runner on match day. And at the first test, I don't know if you remember it or not, but it was, you're probably not old enough, lucky you, but it was at the Gabba in Brisbane. It was the day the Lions turned Brisbane red. They were absolutely incredible. And I was meant to be sitting in a truck at the back of the stadium, pressing a button every time someone made a tackle or did a turnover or kicked to the corner, or whatever it was. So I was inputting stats. And none of the tech had arrived at the stadium. It was all being held in customs. And 20 minutes before kickoff, and I was probably just 21, 20 minutes before kickoff, a guy wandered up and said, "There's nothing for you to do here. Here's a pitch pass. Go watch it pitch side." And I will never, it still actually gives me hairs on the back of my neck to stand up. I walked round the outside of the pitch, age 21, with Brisbane just going off. It just went off, and the lines were incredible. And I just remember at that point thinking, there is nothing else on planet Earth I want to do right now. So that was the moment I wanted to be a broadcaster. The real pinch me moment. Hello, Six. The real pinch me moment from a broadcasting perspective actually was another being chucked in the deep end. So I reported for about 18 months, did the Lions tour, and then when I came back from the Lions tour in 2005, I started joining up on Sky Sports News. So they wanted to turn me from a reporter into a presenter, and I'd done probably about a month's worth of presenting, which is a different skill set. It's a different game. It's a different type of interview that you're conducting. And again, on the Friday night, I was actually on air. I was on Sky Sports News, and they repeat the 11 till 12 hour, and they record the 11 till 12 hour until midnight, and then they repeat that until 6 o'clock in the morning when the new presenters come in and off they go. So 12 until 6 is the same hour again. And it was 11:30. The producers came running in. He said, "You've got to go home now. We need you back in at 4:30 in the morning." The current main rugby presenter is a guy called Simon Lazenby. His eye has blown up. And you can sort of read into that what you like. Anyway, so I went off there. The reason I remember it so vividly is that everybody in the gallery, and there must have been 20 or 30 people, groaned because it meant that they would have to do a whole other hour because I had to go off air and they had to find another replay. Anyway, by the by. So anyway, I went home, I lay in bed, I didn't really sleep. I got up at 3:45. I was back in Sky by 4:30 in the morning, and it was a full day of international rugby. So it was one of the summer tour days, I think, and it was Australia v England, New Zealand v Ireland, Wales v South Africa v Wales, or something like that. And I had an hour to prep. I had, everyone was pretty panicky. And I just remember the PA saying, "Right, we're on air in 30 seconds, 20 seconds." And I looked up and I was there with Michael Liner, Sean Fitzpatrick, Bobby Skinstad, and I think it was Will Greenwood at the time. And I was just like, I'm just really not sure what I'm doing here. And actually, I don't know if you can swear on this program or not, but Fitzy, who is now a very good friend, as the clock went 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, he just leant over and tapped me on the knee and just said, "Don't fuck it up, mate." And that was it. So I tried very hard not to do that. And that was, I always say, there was a bit like the turd that wouldn't flush. I just kept hanging in there. And eventually got to do something with it. That was the definite pinch me moment. But mad, absolutely mad.
It's great to be able to relive those moments now. I mean, there must have been an element as well where you naturally, anybody in that position would have that sort of imposter syndrome slightly. I was speaking to Michelle Owen of Sky Sports News the other day, and she struggles at times as well when just knowing, particularly in this Instagram generation that we're in now, any slight slip up, the mispronunciation of someone's name, and people are all over it like a rash within seconds, and then direct messaging you, hurling abuse at you. There must have been an element of that imposter syndrome and sort of worrying about what a potential reaction could be like afterwards.
Do you know, I am so grateful that I am old enough that or that I was young enough that my broadcasting career began before social media had really lit. I had some chronic on-air disasters. There's one very, very famous one, which is repeated on every bloopers show that Sky ever puts out. And I think a lot of people thought I was having a stroke on air, and I just lost the ability to think, speak. It went very badly, but there were loads of others as well. There was a time on Sky Sports News and I was training at the time, so I must have been 2 or 3 months in. And they'd come to me every 15 minutes, and I'd update the golf, and I'd do this and that. And it was a really, really minor role within the show. And again, it was so you go off air on Sky Sports News at I think 5:02, And it got to 9:53, and I thought, well, there's nothing more for me to do here. They're not going to do it. And I literally picked up all my notes, all my golf references on, I chucked them on the floor, getting ready to go. And as they hit the floor, the producer came back and said, "Oh my God, Tiger Woods has got a putt." He's standing over a putt to stay in the, whatever it was, some golf tournament I'd never even heard of. And he said, "Right, you're in vision, talk over it." And I was like, and I got no reference. I didn't know what hole he was on. I was just like a car. You know that scene in Austin Powers where they just go backwards and forwards? I just had nothing to say. I had absolutely nothing to say. And I had people just sliding bits of paper over the desk. And it felt like a quarter of an hour of just utter disaster. It was probably a minute all in. But, you know, if that had happened now, I would never, ever, ever have worked in television again. But yeah, that is what it is. I tell you that almost the most interesting thing from my perspective is that, and I was talking with someone about this the other day, that imposter syndrome. I had real imposter syndrome for a long time, and it was partly because I looked very, very young. And it was, I was living my dream job. I put quite a lot of pressure on myself as well. I was absolutely desperate to never get it wrong. I really beat myself up if I stumbled a word and I had this chronic meltdown on air, which is available on YouTube, and I could tell you a million stories about it. But it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I came away thinking, you know, actually none of this matters. This is really, really, really incidental. And today, as we sit here, you and I chatting, and America burns and the world is on pause, you know, there is stuff out there that is really significant. And actually some prat talking about a sports game and getting his words jumbled up really isn't very interesting in the grand scheme of things. Of course, there are keyboard warriors out there who come and pile in, but actually most of it's fairly entertaining. And I definitely have moved now. I mentioned earlier, I used to feel a broadcaster who had a sort of tech side pod, and now I feel like you know, I'm obsessed with my business, and actually I doodle with the broadcasting because it's fun, it's an outlet. And I feel a much better broadcaster now because I don't have that. I don't put that pressure on myself. People don't like it. Switch off and go to something else. I do far less research. I don't do any research at all. I just am interested in people, and you know, I've got to the point now where you know, I've done it for long enough that I'm sort of just happy to see. I fire on the fear. I used to be very, very prepped, very scripted. I used to want to know exactly what was happening, where they wanted me to go. I absolutely love it now when the shit hits the fan. And I love it when it goes wrong. I love not really knowing what it is that I'm meant to be talking about, because that's when you switch on and you make things happen and you live in the moment and you talk to interesting people and you listen to what it is they're saying, as opposed to trying to force in your preconceived ideas. So I'm probably not the right person to talk to about that social media phenomenon. I'm very glad it wasn't there when I joined. I'm not really that interested in it now. I'm not really that interested, you know, if people get involved in it. It's just, I've got other things to do, you know, it's fairly incidental. And I think there is hopefully a sort of a growing trend where other people will feel that. And I really hope Michelle doesn't worry about it. And, you know, it's just, life is far too short to worry about things like that. You know, I've got a brilliant quote actually, which I read the other day, and actually I wrote it down. I love quotes. Where is it? It is, most people who are judging and criticizing haven't even tried what you've failed at. I just thought it was a really nice way of just saying, don't stress about it, just crack on. So yeah, it is what it is. And if people want to get involved, good luck to them.
But the reality is, I suppose, like you say, there are greater things, you know, far more important things going on in the world. You're not, by cocking up something or a few words on Sky Sports News, you're not exactly ruining somebody's day. But one of you mentioned there that you know, don't necessarily prepare so much anymore. You enjoy living on the edge a little bit when it comes to content and production and that side of things. One of your passion projects, I'd imagine, for the last couple of years or coming up to 2 years has been House of Rugby. Did you ever anticipate that almost 2 years later you'd be pulling in the volume of viewers and listeners that you are?
So it's really funny you asked that question, and it's really pertinent timing as well, because we have literally about 2.5 hours ago released our latest podcast, which is with a guy called Burgess, and I've had 10 journalists on the phone to me this afternoon. It's blown up. It's all over the Telegraph. It's all over the Times. I think this is. I mean, he absolutely goes to town on his Union career. It's seismic. I'm literally living this story breaking and the whole thing kicking off. What did I think it was going to be? I still have a very good relationship with Sky. I don't do very much work there anymore. They haven't really got very much rugby. And so I'm sort of on a pay-as-you-play basis. It's pretty loose. They may come back. We might have a conversation. So I was sort of sad when it reached its natural conclusion. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. I took a call from a guy at Joe who published our podcast and said, look, we're thinking about doing something at rugby. Do you want to have a conversation around it? We had a coffee. He said, what do you think? And I have a number of frustrations with sport at the moment. I have this thing called the Sky Sports News Test, which is that there are, it's on 24 hours a day. I always challenge players to try and become the person where you reach for the control to turn it up. Everybody has it on mute. It's on in every pub. And actually, the truth is no one ever really sits down to watch it. If you can become a personality where what you say means people want to turn it up and listen, then I think you've got something. I don't think there are very many people, certainly in rugby, much more broadly in sport at the moment, where actually you do that. Jose probably, or on Gatland, you definitely want to have a listen to what he says. But in terms of current players, Joe Marler, because you're never entirely sure where the hell he's going. But there aren't many who you really want to listen to. And so I said to the guys at Joe, I want to create a show whereby people come on, they say what they think, and we get some proper stories out of these people. And they said, well, who'd be interesting? Haskell is, and I love him, absolutely love him to bits. And I love him because he just gives you something every time. He will say what no one else will say, and he doesn't really mind. And we need that. Sport is so competitive in that arena. Rugby is fighting with football and cricket to get column inches, to get people interested in it more than ever now as e-gaming takes off and Netflix expands. We need characters in sport to drive interest levels and engagement. So they said, who would you do it with? I said, I thought Haskell will be brilliant because he'll give you something every week, and Tindall will be amazing because he's got a phone book like no one else in sport. And amazingly, they went and got them, and they said, right, let's build this thing and see where we can go with it. And I did, funny enough, I listened back the other day to the first one, and it was really plasticine and sort of just wasn't very interesting. And we are sponsored by Guinness, who are a great sort of sponsor, and we had about 2 months where they didn't put any product in and it was all very dry. And then we did a Christmas show in fancy dress and they just kept the Guinness coming. And the three of us, embarrassed to say, ended up getting really quite pissed whilst recording. And it just lit from that moment. We just suddenly realised what it was that we were meant to be doing. And we found what was the secret formula, which is that, we go where other people don't. And some people will say it's gross and you swear, but actually, it's not deliberate, but it's liberating in that sort of interview context. There aren't many other people out there doing what we're doing, but this Burgess story has absolutely exploded. It's the story that everybody in rugby has been waiting for 5 years. And honestly, between you and I, it came about because he got drunk last week and rang Hask. Hask picked up. They had a conversation which Sam can't even remember. And Hask said, "Oh, do you want to come on the pod and have a chat with Alex tonight?" And Sam was like, "Yeah, let's do it." So we rang up, got him on the phone yesterday on Skype, recorded. We chatted for 3 hours, and literally this story is he dishes the dirt on his story of 2015, and that is quite unique. It's actually really made me think about journalism today, and there are 100 rugby journalists out there who have, and I know this for a fact, have tried to get Sam to tell the story. Why has he come to Haskell and yours truly to tell it? It's because there's a relationship there, and that is I think the biggest change in broadcasting is that when I joined Sky told you how it was. They broadcasted at you. They said, "This is what we're talking about. This is why we're talking about it," etc., etc. And it was a conversation where the audience listened and Sky spoke. What's happened with the advent of social media is that it's now a dialogue. Sky speak. And the audience wants to reply. They've got a platform where they can rebut, or they can challenge, or they can agree, or whatever it is. And that is, I think where broadcasting is going is you now have to include or make your content feel like you're in a conversation, not a lecture. And I hope that's how people perceive House of Rugby, is that it honestly just feels like you're eavesdropping on three mates having a chat. And we're not afraid to get stuck into some fairly meaty subjects and to challenge the people that come on, but it's always meant to be done in quite a fair way. Everyone gets a right to reply, but it's a chat, and it's a chat, not an interview, and there's definitely a difference in that, I think.
And the proof is there for all to see with the number of viewers and the amount of people you get listening in, and how well it's followed, for example, on Instagram. I mean, another podcast that follows a similar sort of pattern is that Peter Crouch podcast as well, where you've again got three people talk to each other in such a laid back setting. It's a lovely listen because again, it's like mates just getting along. And the nice thing about that as well is you've kind of got the juxtaposition of Chris Stark, who's almost like kind of football nerd that's still kind of fascinated by the game, and then Peter Crouch that is the Joker, almost the James Haskell in the House of Rugby situation. It's testament to how brilliant House of Rugby is. The fact that, the other week, Nigel Owens, another example, was able to tune in and felt so comfortable that he could reveal certain parts of his life that he perhaps hasn't disclosed before. And he came on and he just talked so eloquently. And I've had a number of people that knew I was talking to you today that wanted to kind of pass on that how amazing and, impressive that interview was. So it's really kind of doing the business.
Well, I hope so, and that's very kind of. I'm always very, very grateful for feedback. You're never quite sure. I mean, someone messaged me yesterday and said, how was the Burgess interview before it had come out? And you're never quite sure. Inevitably players reflect on their performance, and as an interviewer and a host, I do exactly the same thing. What I would say is that Nigel episode was extraordinary to do, and actually, and I know I don't mean it to, but it is really. Is gratifying the right word? It's very satisfying when you get a message, and actually there were a few off the back of that where people said, by listening to that, it has actually really made a difference. I've had a really crap week, and listening to Nigel and you guys chat it through has actually it's been a distraction. It's helped, and it's moved me forward. And it's not something I ever considered that this podcast would be, but it's really nice to know that actually the shambolic content we produce actually sort of has resonates with people, and that they are very affectionate towards it, etc. We did a show in Cardiff during Six Nations, and I think we had 1,200 tickets sell out in an hour and a half, kind of thing. And it was at that point we're beginning to think, crikey, there are a lot of people out there listening to this kind of thing. I get more people, God love them, shouting Payno at me in the street now off the back of one we did the other day, than anything I ever did with Sky. And I think that is because people feel a connection, because you're chatting with them, you're not talking at them. And long may that continue.
And you've obviously taken House of Rugby on tour as well. You were in Japan for the Rugby World Cup. And I think, again, I watched whilst I listened to a lot of House of Rugby during that tour, I watched a lot of James Haskell's video. He was doing a vlog, wasn't he? I think just sort of breaks the wall down essentially, and people can resonate with yourself even, being surrounded by those ex-professional rugby players. It's just a really nice environment.
Yeah. I was just saying that Haskell never stops vlogging. Like, his life is perpetually played out on Instagram Live, etc. It was, I will be honest with you, it was, and I have to be careful saying this with my wife potentially listening, it was probably the most fun I've had in a long, long time. It was a real giggle, and it was all built on the fact that the tournament itself was fantastic, and England were obviously a great story in it, and we were following England, etc., etc. But we did have an absolute riot, and it's nice. I mean, I was given a really good piece of advice actually years and years ago. I can still remember exactly where I was. I went to the Wasps game in 2004, and we ended up in the same club as Wasps that night. I was young, excited, and sort of just not playing it. Play it cool, Rodney, play it cool. I definitely wasn't doing that. And one of the guys at Sky just took me aside and said, look, there is a barrier here. Don't ever cross it. Don't ever try and be friends with players. It just doesn't help. They're not interested. and it was like a real penny dropping moment. And I went from being a fan, almost at that point, from being a fan to being a broadcaster. And I've never had any interest, in players and being friends with them, etc. It's just, I'm middle lane to middle age, and I'm happy doing my thing. But it has been interesting, actually, genuinely becoming really good friends with Haskell and Tins, and you just end up seeing it's really odd going from Mike, particularly, when he won the World Cup, I was a fan, and now he's Tins, and it's they always say never meet your heroes, and that doesn't reflect this situation, but it is very interesting when you look at people eye to eye, as opposed to with that I suppose with that aura. And Fitzy is a classic example of someone who, I was absolutely bollock scared of when I first started working with him. And, he was the All Black captain in 92 tests, and he'd won the World Cup. And I was a squirt who'd just left university. And now he's a really great guy. We have the most fabulous lunches once a quarter with 4 or 5 of us. And, I'd consider him a mate. And it's been I've never really stopped to reflect on it before, but it's I suppose it is quite curious looking back, and that, I think, also is part of, you were talking earlier about that sort of pinch yourself moment, when that aura falls away and you realise these guys are exceptionally good at rugby, but they all get up and put their pants on in the morning. I think you do your job better because you start talking to them, and I feel much more sort of comfortable. Obviously, I've done 15 years of it, but I'm sort of comfortable talking on their terms, kind of thing. And I hope by doing that, you're actually able to unlock more from them because they feel they're having that conversation element. It's not that looking up and that interview. I don't know, who knows?
Easy to forget that they enjoy a human conversation as well. I think it's particularly in an arena when they're preparing for work, or preparing to go on camera or be recorded. Easy to forget that they like having a general conversation. It doesn't always have to be to do with the sport that they're involved in. But when you were in Japan, were there any moments where you sort of found yourself out with Haskell and you had to rein him in slightly, or even I know I saw a couple of episodes where Mike Tindall was incredibly hungover and struggling a little bit, but was there any wild nights out in Japan?
What goes on tour stays on tour, but I will just say that we had a lot of fun. I mean, prior to Japan, Paul Wallace, who played for the Lions in Ireland, was by far and away the baton carrier in that regard. In fact, in Melbourne in 2013 on the Lions tour, we lost Wally for about a week, but that's a very different story. But I will say that Tins lives with the best of them, and Hask is an absolute riot. It was a lot of fun. But interestingly, actually, the other thing you pick up on is 2 points really about the fact that we're in a conversation. Most rugby players, the last thing I want to talk about is rugby. And the other thing, and actually I learned that was a very good lesson. Never talk to a rugby player about rugby. The other thing that I think is quite interesting, and I think has sort of helped me build relationships with some big names, is that actually coming on television can actually be really daunting. And we did a European Cup final. It must have been 2013, I think it was, and it was I think it was Claremont. It was Claremont-Toulon, I think it was, at the Aviva in Dublin. And Ronan O'Gara was our guest. And Ronan O'Gara's kicked 1,000 points for Ireland. He's won the Heineken Cup twice. He's a Grand Slam champion. He's one of the most experienced players to have ever played the game. And he openly said he was bricking it as the clock ticked down and we were going on air. And part of my job is to make people feel very comfortable. And I said to him, we're on air in 2 minutes and we're on air in 1 minute. He was like, really? Are you being serious? Are we actually doing? Well, hang on, I'm not really ready for this. And I'm like, that's fine. Listen, don't worry about it. All you need to worry about, I'll come at you with a really gentle loosener to start the show, just to get your first answer out, and then literally we're off and running. But it's very interesting often seeing these guys who have played in cauldrons and faced down the hacker and World Cup quarterfinals, etc. You take them out of their comfort zone and you bring them into what was at that time a fairly natural habitat for me. And the shoe's very much on the other foot. So most of them are really, and that is the nice thing about working in rugby, is that most of the guys are really genuinely good people. And there aren't huge egos. They're all pretty down to earth. They're all pretty interesting people. So yeah, it's interesting though watching heroes quiver in a different setting.
I think that's a good piece of advice, actually, probably for people that are looking to maybe have a career in sport broadcasting, is that don't necessarily think by interviewing somebody that they're necessarily feeling as confident as you may think. Don't be overruled by them, because it could be that they are feeling just as nervous as you are. But before we close, I'm keen to get your thoughts on the potential remainder of the Championship and Premiership season. It's been announced that players can begin to return to non-contact training on a non-contact basis. Can you realistically see a return to action and the completion of this season?
We didn't really play that. I think that, I think there are reasons that they will complete it, and I cannot get my head around those reasons. I think if we end up, in October, having the first round of the European Cup, or the Heineken Champions Cup as it is, on the same weekend as last season's Champions Cup finals being played, if I was in charge, I would just say cut, forget it, have a 3-month break, enjoy it, and we'll get going perhaps a month earlier. Let's get going at the start of August. Actually, probably that might well be where we end up anyway. But I just would start again. I just think trying to finish one season while you're also starting another is just chaos. But I imagine there are financial reasons why they need to finish all these things. I really don't know the answer. I sort of have gone round the roundabout with the whole thing so many times. I'm just like, it is going to be what it's going to be.
It's exhausting.
It's what?
It's exhausting just thinking about it a lot of the time, I find.
It is a bit. And I just kind of want to start again. I just want a blank sheet of paper where we get back to what it is that we know. And I do think rugby has got some fairly seismic, fairly fundamental problems at the moment. There are some big opportunities, but there are some massive, massive challenges. And much as I love the game, there are parts of it I'm hugely disillusioned with as well. And I think there is light at the end of the tunnel. I think there will be some fairly big changes coming quite soon. CVC obviously are spending some money, and I think there might be a global alignment in the calendar. But it just needs to get on with it. They really need to use this scenario at the moment to reboot, to start again, to get a product that works, where everyone's on the same page and pulling in the same direction, not different hemispheres heading off in different directions, ideas, competitions. I worry that the game isn't going to be able to snap it up as it should be, and that we're going to sort of drag it on a little bit. But you've got to keep your fingers crossed that we end up with a product that is totally aligned. Everyone knows what we're doing, and it's better for it.
I have a friend that, aside from asking me to ask you what it's like working with James Haskell, was keen to know who from overseas. I mean, I'm based down in Bristol. I'm a Bristol Bears fan. So they've obviously announced some pretty big names to be joining them ahead of next season. Out of overseas players that you've watched, who would you be keen to see playing or cutting their teeth in the Premiership, maybe next season or the season beyond?
Good question. It's exhausting working with Hask, utterly exhausting, but great fun, and we do have a good giggle. And actually, he's much softer than you'd think as well. He's got a strut and a bravado to him, but he does care as well, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily always see that. So he's a good man. Who would I like to see from overseas? That is a good question. Do you know? Again, I can slightly flip it on its head. I think there's some really good young talent in the Premiership that it probably isn't getting the chance that it should, or that they should and could have. And I think the Premiership will, this new salary cap, they're going to take in all the recommendations from Lord Miners. I think we will see quality international players coming, but probably not the broad influx that we have had. I think clubs will start going back to their academies in a bigger way in order to fit in with these new salary cap sanctions. So I think the likes of Harry Mallander, Max Malins, etc. are really exciting young kids to keep an eye on. I'd love, what Lewis Ludlam's doing, etc. And I think there's some really good talent that will hopefully, certainly from an Eddie Jones point of view, will have the chance to flourish quite quickly. Who would I bring over from overseas? I think it's fascinating. Carter's gone back to the Auckland Blues. I mean, the best player in the world right now, arguably, is Beauden Barrett. I think I cannot see any way that he comes to the Premiership, but I'd love to see him in Europe one day. I think, and playing in the south of France, or whatever it might be, I can see him ripping up trees down there. I don't know. That's a good question, really. I mean, I don't know. I don't know the answer. I mean, there's some fabulous players, and I'm conscious I'm probably not giving you the answer you want. I think I'd like to see English youth get more of a chance than it does. I'd love to see more alignment between the Premiership and the Championship, although I think those boats are sailing further and further apart. I would love this, the A-League to have been wrapped up and to put into the Championship. I'd love to see young guys, who are Sarries players, but they go and spend a year at Bedford and actually they get properly into it at Bedford. It's not they dip in, dip out kind of thing. I would love the Championship to be the breeding ground properly, officially, for the Premiership. But again, I can't see that being an instant resolution. I think there'll be more effort made to build up the A-League again, which, is it interesting? I don't know. But yeah, I think we'll end up with star quality. I mean, the likes of Peartown and Randragon perspective are incredible. I think absolute superstars, but I think that middle tier, potentially, we won't see as much action there anymore.
Yeah, and it's interesting actually, because I just thought back to one of your recent podcasts with Ellis Genge. In fact, I think James Haskell picked up on the fact that there's that sort of middle to lower tier squad player that isn't necessarily always paid as much as those players that come in from abroad, and hopefully a salary cap will benefit them. Because I've seen, particularly with the Bristol Bears, there's been some brilliant players that I've watched have an amazing season, maybe then have a bit of an injury layoff, and then have just literally had to change tack, change career completely, and have actually thankfully benefited maybe from picking up a university degree alongside playing rugby. But hopefully, like you say, that salary cap would benefit those young English players.
Yeah, I think the point. We also did one with Luther Burrell, who's now playing with Warrington Wolves, I think, in rugby league, and his point was very similar, which is that your global superstars are going to earn £1 million, and there are 10, 15, 20 of them in the Premiership. Your academy kids on 17, 20 grand, whatever it is, loads of them about, but it's that middle tier that's getting hugely squeezed, and that's why he's found himself going to league. Is that there's an England guy, 35 caps, whatever it is, played for Northampton, won the Premiership, but he is commanding a fee now where they can't pay guys like that the money that they want, because the salary cap doesn't allow it. It's not the salary cap doesn't allow it, but you can't have too many players at that level in a squad, because otherwise you end up with 10 really good players, but a massive chunk of your revenue gone. So therefore, what you were seeing is clubs blending superstars with academy kids, and that middle tier is getting really, really squeezed. So I hope that it pans out again and it levels out. Although I think what will happen is those superstars will get squeezed out, and those middle tiers will come back into it again. Would probably be how it plays out.
Well, thank you very much for talking to me today. You've probably done enough talking if you're on the call earlier on recording House of Rugby for 3 hours with Sam Burgess. But I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me this evening, and I wish you all the best for what lies ahead with House of Rugby as well. Very exciting, because you're putting a smile on a lot of people's faces during which is a pretty testing time. So thank you very much for talking to me.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Toby. I hope you can make some sense out of that. But great to chat, and good luck with your endeavours as well. We're watching with real interest. Thanks so much.